All right. So again, welcome to the session on what's new and what's not so new in volunteer training. This is a session that we do every year at this event to keep people up to date on what's happening with training in Minnesota. And as I was looking for what I had to update this year, it was kind of like, oh, good, not a lot, because the last few years have been really chaotic with all of the changes that COVID brought to us. Literacy Minnesota had been doing training for 50 years. It had been rolling along quite nicely. And then the pandemic struck and we were forced to stop doing in-person things. So we had to figure out a way to shift to doing online training, and that was a big hassle. And then as that happened, we looked at it as a way to sort of reassess how we're providing training. Online is a great new model for how we could provide training for our volunteers, as is asynchronous training. And so we really kind of did a revamp of our entire training program. And so I think the first time we did this, it was like, this is what we're thinking of doing. And then it was, this is what we're trying. And now I think we're in the, this is what we are doing stage of things. Obviously, it's going to be tweaked and evolve as the field changes, as we regain that momentum. So this is going to be a fairly Minnesota-specific training, especially the first part. So those of you who are outside of Minnesota, I hope you can use this information to inform what you are doing in your program. And then the second part will be pretty applicable to you guys, everybody, because all of our trainings are accessible to everybody in webinar format. So again, the first part will be looking at the volunteer training standards, so the requirements that our state Department of Education puts upon us for our use of volunteers and training of volunteers. And then the second part will be looking at what we have developed to meet those training standards. So I got a slide here. Exciting dates in Minnesota adult education volunteers training history. So Literacy Minnesota did its first training in 1969. And that was actually 3 years before we were actually an organization. And at that point, there was a nationwide momentum out of Laubach Literacy Action, or pro-literacy, focused around Laubach Way to Reading. I'm sure some of you are familiar with that series, Bird with a Long Tail and a Round Body. 12-hour training that we provided to our volunteers who were pretty much working with native English speakers working at a really low literacy level, because that's who we saw back in the early days. And then in 1980, the Minnesota saw a large influx of refugees and immigrants. So we added an English as a second language training volunteers to work with adults on English language skills. And that's soon became our biggest program and continues to be our biggest program. So those trainings were rolling along. Both of them were 12 hours long, and they were mandatory from the program standpoint. Most people took them. And then state staff, somebody one day was sitting around looking at the statute, and it said, you need to require everybody who is providing instruction to adult education students in our system with training. And so that was in 2006. So worked together with the state to come up with the first set of volunteer training standards, which were based on what we were already doing, which is providing those 12-hour trainings. That went along really well for 14 years, and then the pandemic hit. And we had the problem of tutors couldn't access that mandatory training because they couldn't come to things in person, and we didn't have anything created virtually. And so the state suspended the training requirements. As COVID rolled along, we created the resources to allow people to meet the requirements. We worked with the state to come up with a tweaked set of requirements, and on October 1st, 2021, we released the new set. So that is what all of our training is based upon, meeting the standards for volunteers set by the state. So I will send you a link to the entire set of standards. It's great reading, but I wanted to pull out the most important nugget for me. And that's like sort of what is the point of having volunteer standards? It's like all volunteers should receive the training and support they need in order to feel comfortable and to provide effective service to learners. And I think there's a two-pronged goal there. The first part, of course, is to make sure that we are providing the best possible service to our learners. And so we really want volunteers to be trained so that they can provide high quality service to our students. And then there's that second piece, which is for the volunteers' comfort. Nothing worse than going into a situation feeling unprepared, not knowing what you're supposed to do, not being good at it. And so a big chunk of the standard is really to help volunteers feel comfortable. So the training is meant not only to ensure that students get good service, but to ensure that volunteers feel comfortable. Now, I know as a volunteer coordinator, I was a volunteer coordinator for many years. I know there's this tension between wanting volunteers to take training and not wanting them to have to do anything more than they're able to do, right? And so asking them to take 12 hours of training or 4 hours of training is a big lift for some of our volunteers. And so really keep the spirit of the law in mind. We want volunteers to be trained so our students get served well and so that the volunteers feel comfortable. And I've had a lot of volunteers who started tutoring and then took the training, and they're like, wow, it would have really been helpful if I took this training before I started. And I'm like, yeah, that's probably why we told you to take the training before you started, but you resisted. So again, we know that people have lives, they're busy, but we really want them to get the training that they need. So in a nutshell, here is the volunteer requirement. And all volunteers will need to go through what is called provider-specific orientation and training, and I'll get to that in a second. And then depending upon your role or the volunteer's role, they will need an additional 4 hours of training or an additional 12 hours of training to meet the specific training requirement. And I'll go into that detail as well. So start with provider specific orientation and training. Okay, everybody needs this. Okay, specifically the volunteers with no instructional or tutoring responsibility, those who are doing support services, bookkeeping, tech aids, data entry, so forth. And I'm just curious, in the chat box, if you could chat out, how do you have volunteers working in non-tutoring roles in your program? Could you list out some of the ways you use those in non-instructional ways, non-tutoring ways? So front desk greeter is a non-instructional role. I would put conversation circles in the next category I'll talk about. Developing this curriculum, secretary, that front desk person. So lots of great ways to use volunteers in that role. And of course, the site-specific volunteer orientation is going to be, this is what our organization is, and this is what to say when somebody comes to the front desk. So that's specific training for their specific tasks. Okay. And of course, this is the only training that these volunteers are required to have. If they're going to do instructional stuff, they'll need this orientation plus the additional trainings. So that's cool. I'm reading Joe's comments, student advocate, like help life skills like getting a Minnesota ID. So doing some navigation there. So then we'll talk about the 4-hour training requirement. Who needs the 4-hour training requirement? And these are volunteers who only work as classroom assistants under the direction of a licensed teacher or a volunteer who has met the 12-hour requirement. So a lot of programs, especially here in Minnesota, have a class that's led by a teacher, and then volunteers come in and provide assistance to that teacher. Another category of people who need the 4-hour training are those volunteers who are helping out with subgroups. And so sometimes there'll be a main teacher, and then the class will break up into leveled groups, and a volunteer will work with each of those level groups, or a different volunteer will work with a different group. And those volunteers would need the 4-hour training because the main instruction is provided by the teacher. Another category, and this is one that we really kind of promote people doing, is providing supplemental instruction. So for example, the students come to citizenship class on Tuesday with a teacher, and then on Wednesday, maybe they go to an online mini discussion circle led by a volunteer about the citizenship stuff. So it gives them a chance to practice the same content that they're learning in the classroom. And then the last category are volunteers who serve as navigators, digital literacy, career navigators, social services, and so forth. So for those of you who have programs where you're having volunteers assist the teacher, what are some of the tasks that you have that volunteer do? Go ahead and chat those out. So phonics review, yeah, phonics is very labor intensive and students need that individual focus. And so volunteers are great for any programs that are doing phonics. What else? So great opportunity to break people into small groups. Online, very helpful to have a volunteer helping out in an online class. So volunteers who fit into this category need that initial site orientation plus 4 hours of training. And that is specified to be the core module 2, which I'll talk about in a second. And then any other 2-hour module that meets the needs of the student and tutor. So it might be something on how to help with conversation, or something on helping with phonics, or something related to whatever the volunteer is doing. And then the last category are the volunteers who need the 12 hours of training. So the initial orientation plus the 12 hours. And so those are volunteers who are delivering individual instruction with minimal or no direct supervision of a teacher. So a lot of community-based volunteers or programs use volunteers in this capacity, where the volunteer is the main instructor. And so we want them to get as much training as possible, which in this case is the full 12 hours. And I guess I had to reread my slide here. First part is for volunteers who are working one-on-one. The second one is for volunteers who are leading a class. So if you have a program where you're using volunteers not under the direction of a teacher, could you share out what you have that volunteer do? How does the volunteer lead instruction? A long wait to see if anyone responds. Okay, a lot of programs don't. Again, I think in Minnesota, most volunteers work as classroom assistants. I know in other states, there's a lot of volunteer-led instruction. Oh, Ashley's saying most of her classes are volunteer taught. So again, we wanted to distinguish between those two things and provide a different training requirement. And what does that need to be? The 12 hours, and that includes all of what we call the core modules, and then that adds up to 8 hours. So another 4 hours where the volunteers can choose what's appropriate for their particular situation. And then the last requirement, and this was added by request of our volunteer coordinators, who said, could you give us a requirement that allowed us to mandate tutors take ongoing training, because sometimes you get volunteers who have been there for a long time and they're kind of stuck in their ways. And so you can mandate that they take 2 hours of training, and this can be something provided through Literacy Minnesota, something formal from your organization, or something informal. But it's a way to, again, give you the tool to encourage volunteers to do continued training. And then I want to go back to the spirit of the law again. Talked about the letter of the law. This is the spirit of the law. All volunteers should receive the training and support they need in order to feel comfortable and to provide effective service to learners. And I get two complaints about our tutor training. One is it's too short. Teachers will say they come out of that training and they're not professional teachers. And I'm like, well, of course they're not. They have received 12 hours of training. And now's the time for on-the-job training. All of us as educators continue to learn and to grow and to develop our skills. And then on the flip side, I have people say, well, 4 hours, that's way too much. I can't ask a volunteer to take 4 hours of training. And I know that can be an issue, especially if you have short-term volunteers, service learning volunteers. But again, the reason we ask people to do it is so that our students get good service and that the volunteers feel comfortable. So it's that balancing act again. And in Minnesota, the way we are ensuring compliance is that you should, as volunteer coordinator or as program staff, make sure that the trainings that your volunteers go through are documented in SID. And if you're at the opening session this morning, Matt Miller talked about we're working on a system to communicate that information because it's surprisingly difficult. We will tell volunteers to forward their CEUs, the notice that they completed the training to you so that you know and can enter it in the database. But for whatever reason, that's not happening. So we're looking at a more structured way of doing that. And then in Minnesota, eventually you'll be asked to share a report of the training that your volunteers went through to ensure that compliance. And I am gonna hop out of here and find my hidden link. There it is. I'm gonna pop that in the chat, and if I did it right, that should be a link to a Google Doc of the volunteer training standards. So if somebody wants to check to see and let me know that you got the right link, I didn't link you to a cat picture or something like that. It's an image.
The first link is correct. The second one is just an image that sometimes shows up when you copy paste for some reason.
Yeah, and if somebody can explain why that is, I would love that. But if you click on the blue link, it should be the actual link. There it goes. Zoom does updates that are sometimes really valuable, and it must be working because Zoom is complaining. All right, let's get back to the slides. All right, now I want to switch over to part 2 of the training, and that is talk about the training that Literacy Minnesota has created to help volunteers meet these standards. And we have this picture of the plane because we've been using the analogy of building the plane as you fly it. And like I said, we have been scurrying to get this together. I think now the plane is flying and we're just making sure it doesn't fall apart and tightening the screws or whatever the analogy is now. But keep that in as a memory of what we've been through since 2020. So our first training is the 12-hour training, and we call that Foundations of Adult Education Tutoring. And again, it's designed for those volunteers who are volunteering independently of a professional teacher. So all those volunteers who need the 12-hour training. And as I said before, it's those 4 core modules and then 2 targeted training modules. And then the second is for those volunteers who need 4 hours of training, and we call that Foundations of Volunteering in the Adult Education Classroom. Probably going to tweak those names a little bit. They're a little too similar. And as I said, that requires one of the core modules and then a targeted training module of your choice, of their choice. So let's look at the 4 core modules. Some of you may be familiar with them. Some of you may have gone through them, but I'd like to go through what content is included. And because volunteers are going to lots of different programs, working with lots of different teachers at lots of different levels, these core training modules are by design pretty generic. And so we really focus on process rather than specific activities, just to give them that big picture understanding of these topics. And then the on-the-job training that you provide them really gets in the specific of the curriculum that they're using or the specific activities that they are doing. So the first core module, the first 2-hour module, is an overview of adult education and accountability. And so one of the training requirements for content of training is that we go over how things work in Minnesota. So looking at the adult education overview, the 3 sets of content standards that we have for instruction in Minnesota, how our funding works, where it comes from, and then how our students are assessed. And this information is really important so that volunteers understand that they fit into part of a system. And there's a reason why we ask them to do something or ask them to not do something. Really important to know that students are accountable to assessments. And so they can't just be talking about carving pumpkins all the time, because that's not going to help them meet those standards. And so really important stuff to help people understand how the system works and where they fit into the system, and why we ask them to do and not do what we ask them to do and not do. And then the second piece, the fun piece of the evening, is looking at learner goals, barriers, and persistence. And these are fun conversations. We do a lot of talking about just all of us as adult learners. We all have motivations, we all have barriers, and then we all have things that help us persist and prevent us from persisting. So I'm going to do just one of the quick question prompts. We're going to do this very quickly. In the training, we do it much more in depth. But talking about persistence, there are drivers of persistence. There are things that help us persist or push us towards persisting at something. And then there are things that pull us away from persisting. And so, for example, for me, one of the big things that helps me persist at my job is I get paid. I love my job, but I also like getting paid. And if I didn't get paid, I might not be as persistent to come in every day. Something that pulls me away from learning is just, I have so many other things. It's like, I would love to practice the piano, but I don't have time to practice the piano. And I would love to do this, but I don't have time to do this. So in the chat box, share out what is one thing that pushes you or a learner towards persisting, and what's one thing that pulls you or a learner away from persisting. Deadlines, yeah. What else helps you persist? Stress can have either effect. That is true. And many of these things are double-edged swords. Yeah, the big one, seeing progress helps you persist. And then the flip side is not seeing progress. Success breeds success. To something you want to learn. So you have some motivation there about something I want to learn. So again, a helps our volunteers understand these issues, helps them understand that the way they view reading might be different than the way their students view reading. The way they view learning a language might be different than the way their students view learning a language, and then just helping them understand the barriers to attendance in class, persistence in class. I like that one from Literacy Source. Building relationships is a nice one. And that's something we can talk about. One can a volunteer help do is build relationships with the student. Our teacher sometimes doesn't have the time to build those relationships. So one of the things the volunteers can do is build those relationships, because that is something that helps us all persist. All right, core module 2 is probably our favorite module, and that's good because it's part of both of the training package requirements, and it's broken down into 2 parts: culture and principles of adult learning. And so just helping our students our tutors understand about their culture and the differences with the learner's culture. A really fun piece of that is looking at classroom cultural expectations. What is expected in an American classroom or a Minnesota classroom? And then we focus a lot on the video of A Danger of a Single Story, which looks at only viewing something as all good or all bad or all this or all that. And then the second part, looking at the principles of adult learning, just talking about how adults learn best. And then one of our major sensitivity activities, just to put tutors in the shoes of our learners in terms of what is difficult. So just a question prompt here. What are classroom expectations in an American classroom? What are students expected to do? What are teachers expected to do? For example, they're expected to respond in the chat box when the teacher says, please respond in the chat box. So go ahead in the chat box. What are some American classroom expectations or expectations in your program? Come on time. And we know the issues that happen with issues of time. And teachers should be early. Others. Yeah, students are supposed to be self-directed, right? Ask questions, but we know in some cultures, asking questions is viewed as an insult to the teacher. So you don't want to insult the teacher. The whole phone thing, yeah, we struggle with that in lots of places. Issues of gender, working with a team of gender. Who answers first when you have a class of mixed genders? Work together, but not just copy. What does cooperative learning mean? Where are the lines for that? So good discussions about these concepts in general, and then how different cultures have different expectations and where those clashes might occur. So the third module is looking at instructional best practices. And we focus this one on working with learners. So what are some best practices for working with learners? And this one goes over 3 areas: how to do learner-centered instruction, what that means, and how to do it. One that piece of feedback we get from our teachers all the time is how to get volunteers to limit the amount of time that they talk so that students can talk more. So looking at some concrete ways of doing that. And then error correction. Sometimes you need to make errors or correct errors. Sometimes you don't. When should you correct an error? When should you let it slide? And then if you decide you are going to correct the error, what's the best way to do that? There are lots of different strategies there. So again, tutors sometimes, or beginning instructors sometimes struggle with undercorrection, overcorrection. So the training looks at ways to do that. And then the fourth module, again, looks at instructional best practices, but this is really focusing on working with materials. We know that volunteers are asked to work out with a workbook or work with a worksheet or something like that. And so we talk about how to do that without taking into account what specific resource it is. So looking at scaffolding, how do you support an activity to make it easier for the students? How do you check comprehension without just saying, did you get that? You got that? That makes sense, because you know what, look, you get there, students just nodding. So if asking, did you understand that isn't a great comprehension question, check. What are some other questions, or what are other questions you could ask to see if students understand, or other ways you could see that students understand? Go ahead and chat those out. Yeah, now you try. So making them demonstrate what they just said they know how to do, right? Fun emojis, so they can just hold up a happy face or a sad face if they don't understand. You guys are getting at the I do, we do, you do, which is the third bullet there. So that's good. And then that third bullet is really a key part of our training, is to help volunteers understand direct instruction, explicit instruction, I do, we do, you do, just that gradual release of responsibility. So we spend a lot of time getting volunteers to think about how to do that. Modeling is always a great training strategy, a great teaching strategy. Make it like this or do it like this. What I found as both a trainer and a participant is sometimes if I am shown a really good model, that doesn't help me. That just paralyzes me. It's like, oh my gosh, I could never do it as well as that. I just can't do it. And so it kind of pushes me away. So one of my favorite training tools to use is starting out with a negative example of a bad model, giving then tutors a chance to talk about what they could do better. And so that's much healthier for me, because I'm like, well, I'd never be that bad. I might be bad, but I'd never be that bad. So just for fun, I want to show one of the videos that we use in the training. And this is one of our teachers doing a not great job of teaching. And so what I'd like you to do is jot down 2 things that she does that you're like, ooh, that was not good. And now see if I can make the video work.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Today we're going to talk about the calendar. We're going to use a lot of different words. We're not going to talk about months, but we are going to talk about days today. We have 7 days, 12 months, but today we're going to talk about 12 days. We're going to talk together about the calendar. So we're going to talk a lot of English today. You're going to have 2 circles. Some of you are going to be on the outside of the circle. And you're going to talk with a friend. You're going to have a word. You're going to ask what the word is, and you're going to spell the word together. Okay, a lot of English. You're going to accomplish a lot of great things today. We've been talking about this, so you should know these words. I think everybody knows these words. So you're going to have a word. Everyone will have a day word. And we're going to stand in 2 circles. So you will come out of your chair, and you're going to stand in 2 circles. Some of you are going to be looking out. Some of you are going to be looking in. But you will only talk to one person at a time. All right? How many students do we have today? Students.
11.
Okay. So we will have 5 people in the middle, 5 people on the outside. If you're standing on the outside, you're going to look into the middle. If you're standing in the middle, you're going to look outside. Do you understand?
Yes.
Yeah? Okay?
Yes.
Let's do it. Yep, so I said you're going to be in 2 circles. Some of you in the middle are going to be looking out, and the ones on the outside are going to be looking in. So I need 2 of them.
All right, so just makes me happy to show that video. again, I think it's really nice to start out with that because you guys had no problem telling me what she did wrong. And so now we can build upon that to talk about best practices. And I think someone said what module it's in. It's in module 4. All right, I'm going to pause for a second and ask if what questions people have about the core modules.
I have a quick question. I'm in Canada and I'm assuming you said the first core module is about how things are done in Minnesota and the funding and that sort of thing. I imagine it might be a bit different up here. Can you skip part of it if it's not relevant to your own program?
Sure. If you're outside of Minnesota, you're welcome to attend any of our trainings that are useful for you. And I think most programs will just skip the first one because that first part isn't of value.
Right, got it.
It's really designed to meet those training requirements for Minnesota volunteers. All right, I'm going to continue on and talk about those targeted training modules. And these are really getting into the instructional pieces. And I think Caroline is asking about that. So maybe this is where we're getting into those more specific areas. And these are up to the discretion of the volunteer in terms of which they choose to do. We certainly encourage that the volunteer and the coordinator or the teacher work together to decide which module is of most value. And you might choose a module based on the level, beginning level, advanced level, or the specific topic that you are teaching. So what are available? So big areas, beginning ESL, that's where the majority of our volunteers are serving. That's where most of the volunteers are looking for additional training. And so we have a series of 4, just an overview of working with beginning English language learners, a session on reading activities, a session on writing activities, and then a very specific session on how to integrate phonics into adult ESL instruction. So this is where we get into the specific content for those areas. Another area that we work with is we have a lot of what we call intermediate level readers, and those might be native English speakers who are working on reading and writing, and they tend to be at the more intermediate level, or they might be English language learners who have shifted over from focusing on oral language to working on print literacy. And so we have a series of 4 trainings looking at those 4 components of reading. So we look at alphabetics at the intermediate level, which is prefixes, suffixes, root words, compound words, things like that. And then I always get a lot of flack for, is it root word or root word? People almost call me out on that as a Minnesotan. Session on teaching reading vocabulary, that academic tier 2 vocabulary that comes up more in print than it does in oral language. We know at the intermediate level that reading fluency is incredibly important. It's also very labor intensive. And so a lot of teachers have asked for volunteers to help with reading fluency activities. So we have that training. And then all roads lead to comprehension. So we do a session on a handful of comprehension strategies that volunteers can use. Okay. And question, are we non-Minnesotans able to access any of these trainings? Yes, they're all available for everyone. You can register via our website. I'll talk about that in a little bit. We have a third bucket, which are the DEI trainings. These are very, very popular and very, very important. So you can see some of the topics on there. Culturally responsive practices for teaching, racial equity, working with Muslims, LGBTQIA topics, understanding Somali culture. So we do some sessions on specific cultures. Volunteers have found these very important and very rewarding. And then the very descriptive other topics. These are just a random grab bag that don't fit neatly into the above list. Again, more on teacher talk. Trauma is very popular. Zoom during pandemic, we did a lot of how to use Zoom, and then we stopped doing that, and we found that a lot of new volunteers are really uncomfortable with the Zoom, and so we've gone back to offering Zoom trainings. Do you offer series for ABE high school equivalency? Not really yet. We're in the process of developing what used to be the how to prepare for the GED test, which will now be how to prepare for the HSE tests. So that's down the road. Usually we encourage those volunteers to come to the intermediate readers series. So if you visit our calendar, for January and beyond, you'll notice that it is very, very empty because we've said after the event, we will come up with the schedule for the January through June topics. So what I'd like you to do in the chat box is share out what were the top 3 targeted trainings that would be valuable to your volunteers, either one of the things I listed or a topic that I didn't list. Just get a little needs assessment here for what people are thinking is valuable. So yeah, pre-literate is always a great demand. Getting a few ideas. What else can people shout out in terms of most valuable topics? So again, that how to check comprehension. In terms of scheduling trainings, what we've decided is probably the best is to offer a few trainings like the ones that I listed regularly. So every quarter, so that volunteers, whenever they start, don't have to wait 12 months to take the training, and then to throw in the others for those volunteers who attend every single webinar or are looking for information on those specific topics. So try to have that consistent offering with those additional topics added in. So one new training that we're looking at developing, and I'm going to say new training, how long do they last? They are 2 hours long. So in Minnesota, the majority of our volunteers work as classroom assistants, floating around the classroom, assisting teachers. And so we cover that in our core trainings, but we really wanted to pull out and have a separate 2-hour module of volunteering in the adult basic education classroom. And so we are in the process of getting feedback about what content should be in that training. So again, I'm going to pick your brain a little bit here and ask people who are using volunteers as classroom assistants to chat out what they think should be in the 2-hour training on how to float around a classroom, how to be a classroom assistant. So what to look for in a student who may be struggling or knowing how to help, who to help, how to get students to share their thinking. So how to get them to think out loud. That's a great one. Very basic, how to help a student hold a pencil. So getting at that pre-literate level. Other ideas for helping students or tutors who are going to be classroom assistants. So those guiding questions, those facilitating questions. How to teach math if you're not a math person? Come to our session on Monday. All right. If you have additional ideas, keep chatting them out. I will save the chat and review it. Oh, how to give the teacher meaningful feedback on a student. That is a great idea. So people were asking, how do we take these trainings? And there are a variety of ways to do them. One is you can take them as live webinars. So these are 2-hour sessions. We offer them either 6:30 to 8:30 Minnesota time, 1 to 3 Minnesota time, or 10 to 12 Minnesota time. And learned a lot about area or time zones during the pandemic and doing these webinars. So anybody anywhere in the world is welcome to participate. We have a person from I can't speak, Australia, who gets up very early in the morning to come to our trainings. I know somebody said Alaska, big time zone change there the other way. Okay. We do have some trainings recorded. All of our core trainings are recorded, and so volunteers can choose that asynchronous option where they'll watch the video and they'll complete a video reflection form, which gets submitted and it gets reviewed by my colleague, Megan, who will give some feedback. Okay. Also, it will be forwarded to the volunteer coordinator or the teacher, or with service learning students will volunteer or will forward it to the professor. And we have been really impressed by how seriously people take these assignments, and they do really, really good work. I think it's the fact that they know that somebody is going to be reading them. We just had the first one that we rejected in 2 years. So people are really, really taking this seriously. A change coming soon is we are going to shift them over from being watch the video and complete a worksheet to being embedded in a Canvas course. So we'll be releasing module 1 next January, and then we'll be building out the rest of the modules between January and June. So that's exciting. We have how many facilitators do we have? We have 2 on-staff facilitators, and then we contract for other facilitators, and we have guest facilitators. If you're interested in doing a session, let me know. And then the question, how do you track which volunteers have done? Again, that tends to be kind of a bugaboo. When a person finishes a training, we will send them a CEU, a certificate of completion, and then we ask them to take the impetus to the incentive to forward it on to their volunteer coordinator or their teacher. We may be coming up with a more sophisticated way of doing that soon. And then the last is back to the original is in-person trainings. And we have been going back to offering some sessions in person, and for people who like in-service trainings or in-person trainings, those have been great. Do non-Minnesotans get the CEU certificate? Yes, we'll send them a copy of the CEU, and they can use it as is appropriate for their system. So we're always looking for ways to motivate people to take trainings. That's like we're always looking for ways to motivate ourselves. And so we offer certificates. If you commit or complete the 12-hour training getting certificate, if you complete the 4-hour certificate or 4-hour training getting certificate, we also have an equity certificate, so that if people attend 6 equity trainings or culture trainings, then they can get a certificate that says they got a certificate in equity and adult education. And this is really meant to be a carrot to encourage people to take multiple trainings. So it's worked. And so we have that one in place. We're going to set one up for people to go through those 4 intermediate level readers trainings, and we'll probably come up with some other certificates just as a way to get people to do it. It's like digital badging or any other type of reward system. We all love certificates. Okay, we've talked about this, but slide for it. How do we have proof of attendance? They'll get CEUs for each module completed. If they complete the entire 12-hour requirement, then they'll get a certificate. For the foundations training, they won't get a formal certificate, but they'll get a CEU for each module, and then they forward that to the volunteer coordinator or teacher. And then how do people find out about our trainings? Ask you, how did you find out about our trainings? What marketing pieces work? So how do you know what trainings we are offering? If you could chat that out in the chat box, that would be great. So they're on a website. We send out, they're in our newsletter. We send them out to a couple mailing lists. We have an in-state list of volunteers. We have a list of volunteers from around the country that we send them to. So the easiest place to find is our website. So let's go to the website. And move my windows here. If I click on events, it will pull up the full event calendar. So here we are in December. Here's today's conference. And so upcoming in-services are listed. So on Monday, just a plug, Monday afternoon, we're doing a session on tips and strategies for adult education math tutors. And so it's going to be me, who's not a mathy person, and my colleague, Lindsay Poost, who is a mathy person. And we'll be talking about how to help out with math in adult education. We got that beginning reading activities led by my colleague, Megan. We have 2 on Monday, racial equity in the evening. And that brings us to the holidays. And as I said, if I flip to January, not much there, but we will fill that up before we break for the holidays. All right, and then my final slides. Any questions people have of what we've talked about today, or any answers people have about anything in life, that would be great. Go ahead and chat those out. We love your trainings. That's a nice way to end my day. I appreciate that. I think people like our trainings. The goal is to get more people to take them because that can be a struggle. Well, I wasn't fishing for compliments, but I'll certainly take them today. Thank you. All right, well, we'll wrap it up. You guys have been paying attention long enough today. Thank you very much for your participation in the session. Thank you for your attendance at the conference. Thank you for all you do in adult education in Minnesota or wherever you are. One last task, if you could take a few minutes and fill out the evaluation form. You can find the link in your program. I will hang around and answer any questions people have. Otherwise, have a great evening and great weekend. Thanks.